filed a day after Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein ordered an additional 250,000 Iraqi troops into Kuwait, and a week after President Bush decided to send another 200,000 U.S. troops to the Gulf region. The Center for Constitutional Rights filed the suit on behalf of the 45 lawmakers.
Good morning. I'm Ron Dellums, and we've just filed the necessary documentation to bring suit in the Federal District Court, Washington, D.C., that would seek injunctive and declarative relief on the question of who has the authority to make war. We believe that the President is wrong in answering the question, should you seek prior authorization in using offensive military option in the context of the Persian Gulf. And his response has been, my read of the Constitution is that I don't need to do that. We think that the President is wrong, and we filed this lawsuit saying that only the Congress of the United States has the capacity to declare war under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. I'm joined this morning by two of my distinguished colleagues and the two attorneys that will be arguing this case. I'm extremely pleased that 44 other members have joined me in what I consider a very significant question before the country at this particular moment. Go ahead.
This case presents a historic opportunity for the... My name is Jules Lobel, a professor from the University of Pittsburgh and a lawyer with the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. This case presents a historic opportunity for the federal courts to answer the question of who has the right to declare war and initiate war. It is clear that our Constitution gives that authority to Congress and not the President. Yet the President, in this case, has said that he's going to, he is not going to consult Congress, he's not going to seek the consent of Congress before he goes to war, and we think that is illegal and wrong. If the President does go to war without the first seeking and obtaining the consent of Congress, then the victim of Iraqi aggression will not just be Kuwait, but the Constitution of the United States. Thank you.
I think it should be fundamental in this country that one man cannot go to war. What our Constitution said is that the wisdom of our Congress should be necessary to vote upon the important issue of whether America should expend its resources and its people in what could be a major war. We have lived through a situation before where Congress did not vote on whether or not we should have a war, and that was Vietnam. We should not have that situation again. The Congress should debate and decide whether this country should go into war. We're hopeful that this court, the federal court here, will hear this case very quickly. We've asked for a hearing within 10 days. The judge on the case is Judge Harold Green, and we are hopeful that he will hear this case and decide really what the Constitution says, when it's very explicit in saying it is Congress's power to declare war. This is not a power of the President of the United States. The President should be clear at this point that he should be going to Congress to get an authorization to go to war. Here he can go all over the world getting consents from foreign countries, and he cannot go to the Congress of the United States, which represents the people of the United States. Hopefully this court will tell him, go to the Congress. Thank you.
Well, obviously the President has something in mind. He is going to other countries, including the Soviets, getting permission or getting their consent to go to war, but he should tell us, he should tell the American people by telling the Congress, and then the decision will be made by Congress, and that is what the Constitution requires. There is no necessity for quick action here. We are not being invaded. There is no reason at all why the Constitution in this case should not be honored, and that's what this lawsuit is all about.
Good morning. I'm Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. I represent the 9th District of Ohio. the greater Toledo area in northwest Ohio, and I join this suit today and speak as one of the junior members of the Congress of the United States, one who grew up during the Vietnam era and whose friends fought and died in Vietnam. America lost over 50,000 of our best sons and daughters in that war, and probably in a less told story since that time, we have lost an equal number here at home through battle-related illnesses and suicide. They fought an undeclared war that split this nation in two and left our troops subject to the abuses of war and the added abuses of coming home to a nation divided. The state of Ohio, from which I come, has the second largest number of veterans in this country after the state of California. Our people have proven their willingness to fight, but they have a right to know why. We as members of Congress hold a sacred trust with our troops in the field and with the American people here at home. We must meet our constitutional responsibilities to deliberate and vote on any act of war. As a member from the Vietnam generation, when I was privileged to be sworn in as a member of the Congress, I promised myself at that time I would never be a part of any undeclared war. I join this suit on behalf of every mother, of every wife, of every husband and father, and any relative who has a loved one serving our country faithfully in the Middle East. They and you have a right to a Congress that does not shrink from its responsibilities. We have a responsibility to act and to vote. Thank you.
That concludes our opening remarks. If you have any questions.
Could you just talk a little bit about how you see Congress's role under the Constitution and what you said that this was preservation of the Constitution is at stake, or someone did say that. Could you just talk about that issue?
As I said before, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that the Congress of the United States has the power to declare war. And the President of the United States has stated on a number of occasions that he, under certain circumstances, would be prepared to use a military option as a way of solving the so-called crisis in the Persian Gulf. As I said before, the President has then been asked, would you seek prior authorization from the Congress prior to taking that action? And he said, I don't believe that that's my read of the Constitution, that I have the right to do it. We believe that the President has a responsibility in this situation to send to the Congress of the United States a declaration of war. At that point, the political question then is before the Congress of the United States, and we can debate the political question. There are some of us who believe that in the context of the Persian Gulf War would be catastrophic and totally unacceptable. There may be other members of Congress who come to a different conclusion, but that is a political statement, and those issues get resolved in an open and honest and tough debate on the floor of the United States Congress. But what we're saying in this lawsuit is that procedurally, the process that is granted to us under the Constitution of the United States gives Congress that authority. Some people have said, well, don't you believe that this would inconvenience the President? The Constitution is designed to inconvenience one person from taking us to war. War is a very, very solemn and sobering and extraordinary act, and it should not be granted to one person. That's why the people who developed the Constitution of the United States said that it should be the American people through their representatives in a group-oriented process that would ultimately make that decision. So in summary, I'm saying the President should file a declaration of war if he believes at a certain point that war is the only option in the context of the Persian Gulf, and let us then debate the political issue.
Sir, some people are saying not that you're inconveniencing the President, that you're undermining the President.
Pardon?
Some people are saying that by taking action like this, you're undermining his ability to conduct an effective policy in the Persian Gulf. How do you respond to that?
I respond to that by saying that to do anything other than what we're suggesting here is to undermine the Constitution of the United States. As I said before, this is not the President's sole prerogative. To take us to war that might result in the death of tens of thousands of American people, an untold number of people who are not Americans, that is, as I said before, a very sobering act. So the question is, do you restrict the president's flexibility or do you undermine the Constitution of the United States? We only have one form of government. Either you like it or you don't. I believe in representative government, I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in constitutional form of government. I think the president ought to as well.
Isn't it likely that the president is only bluffing here?
Pardon?
Isn't it likely that the president is only using the war threat as a bluff? And aren't you depriving him of the opportunity to use it in that way?
Well, when you talk about a bluff, you're talking about the inconveniencing hundreds of thousands of American people by deploying them in the context of the Persian Gulf. And at a time when we have extraordinary pressures on the American budget, you're also talking about the expenditure of billions and billions of dollars. Again, as I said, either we have a constitutional form of government or we do not. And that question, we're coming to the courts to say, please help us clarify this issue.
Do you think the president really means to take the nation to war?
Well, the question, I don't know. I'm not sure whether the president's going to do it or not, but all we can do is look at the president's public statements, and he has said that I am prepared to use an offensive military option under certain circumstances. I can only look at what the president is doing. The president is presently meeting with Mr. Gorbachev, seeking his approval on the use of force. They've sought approval for the use of force from the United Nations and other countries. We can only look at what these public pronouncements are. I can't talk about motives on the part of the president, but when I see this potential threat that agonizes the American people, that puts tens of thousands of our young people in harm's way, then I can only try to uphold the Constitution of the United States.
What do you think Saddam Hussein? How do you think Saddam Hussein will react to the fact that 1/10 of the House?
There are two people talking at once.
How do you think Saddam Hussein will take the signal that at least 1/10 of the House of Representatives questions the president's policy? Anybody?
I think I would just like to say that in part reply to your question, part reply to yours, what the president chooses to do in his interpretation of the Constitution is certainly within his prerogative. Our interpretation of the Constitution, where it says the Congress shall have the power to declare war, is within our prerogative. And we both have to exercise our responsibilities. As far as Saddam Hussein is concerned, he's got a lot of problems. And I think that the fact that this Congress is prepared to meet its responsibilities is our business as a nation. There are economic sanctions in place. Frankly, I think our first objective in the Middle East has already been achieved, and that is the containment of the initial aggression. That has been done. We have not given the economic sanctions a chance to work. We have not gotten our allies fully on board. We have not gotten them to help pay for this effort to the extent that we should. We've got to get some of that worked out. And when some of our chief allies in this struggle, such as the Soviet Union, are not prepared to back it with force, we have to give ourselves time to get our ducks in order as well, and to exhaust all possible diplomatic means before we move any nation to war.
But does a suit like this give Saddam Hussein less of a reason to withdraw from
I don't
Kuwait?
think Saddam Hussein intends to withdraw from Kuwait at this point anyway. I think what's good about this system is it shows that a constitutional democracy can function, and that we definitely show the difference between the United States of America and a nation like Iraq, which cannot debate war as we can. I think it makes America look good on the face of the earth.
What about the 18
let me just answer that one question again and expand. The assumption on the last three questions is that the only way you can have a peaceful option is to threaten war. And many of us don't agree with that notion, that in some way you say, you're going to have a political settlement or we're going to take you to war. And I'm not sure that that kind of bluffing and that kind of approach makes sense. We've seen that kind of policy in other places in the world. And some of us don't believe that that's an appropriate way to conduct foreign policy. And that if you're going to try to seek a diplomatic solution, it doesn't have to be in juxtaposition to threatening war.
What about the leadership of the House and the Senate?
Congressman Edwards, you were in Congress at the time of the Vietnam War, and there were lots of court challenges then when we had men and women engaged in combat, and they were unsuccessful in the courts at a time when the courts were far more liberal than they are now. What makes you think you have a snowball's chance in hell?
Well, this is an entirely different situation than the Vietnam War. There, the war had already started, and traditionally, Congress supports a war or when our troops are overseas and in jeopardy. Here, there is no real war started yet, and but the president obviously has something in mind, and we know that we constitutionally have the right, and that is why we have standing in this case. This is a constitutional issue, not a war powers issue, not anything else. We have a constitutional right to represent the people and to make the decision whether or not a real war shall begin. And that's why I think in this case we have a very good shot at having the court accept our premise and issue the injunction.
But sir, isn't the question not whether you have a right, but whether the president has an obligation to come to you in this matter? Isn't that the question that has not been decided in a lot of case law?
I think the president has a very real obligation to come to Congress, such a serious obligation that in the Judiciary Committee we took one of the articles of impeachment was that he engaged in the secret bombing of Cambodia for many months, and although the count did not get enough votes, I believe it got 11 or 12 votes or 15 votes, it is an issue that is very important. He has no business avoiding the Constitution or violating the Constitution, which he would be doing if he unilaterally goes to war.
Legally, how can you ask him to how can you ask that he be enjoined from doing something that he hasn't even done yet? And what kind of declaration do you expect the court to make? Mr. President, we want you to follow the Constitution?
The purpose of asking for an injunction is to stop somebody from doing something, and that is what we're asking the court to do. We're not trying to stop the president from going to war. We're trying to stop him from unilaterally going to war without asking the Congress and therefore the American people whether or not we should go to war. Our country is built on dialogue. It is not built on bluff.
Sir, to follow up to the question before, the president would obviously argue that he is having a dialogue with the Congress. He's had meeting after meeting between himself and congressional leaders plus members of his administration.
Well, the president's dialogue with Congress amounts to talking to a handful of members. He hasn't talked to any of us. He has talked a lot more, hour after hour, to foreign leaders, to Mr. Gorbachev, to Chancellor Kohl, just one after another, but there has been no real dialogue with Congress that I know of.
Congressional leaders to call Congress back into session, that's within your power. You can urge congressional leaders to call Congress back into session to take action on your own.
Well, I think that each of us has his own or her own opinion on whether or not the president should call us back. He should call us back in if he has made the decision and is asking us to go to war.
No, sir. But congressional leaders calling you back, calling yourselves back.
The congressional leaders should not call us back because there is no reason to yet, because we just think that the president is very likely to go to war. We should be called back when the president, as commander-in-chief and as president, has made up his mind what to ask Congress.
Mr. Edwards, why do you think the court will not just say this is a political dispute between the legislative and executive branches and we don't want to get involved?
Well, of course, nobody knows what the court is going to do, but we have good lawyers here in this action, the best in the country, and we think we have standing, and that this is a new issue that has been brought up in this lawsuit.
I would just like to make one quick comment. We have tried very diligently to separate out the process issue from the political question, as I've tried to say before. But I want to go back to the question that the young woman raised. Do you have a snowball chance in hell? First of all, I think that that's an incredibly, I think that's an incredibly cynical question, and that cynics don't change the world. And those of us who are standing here are idealistic enough and optimistic enough to believe that we have a responsibility to try to act. And if we simply said we don't have any chance, then we would not act. And people who are cynics don't bring change. Finally, I would say to all of you who are assembled here as members of the press, on every single one of your outlets over the last several weeks, you have intimated that war is intimate. And here are 45 members of Congress standing up saying that if indeed you truly believe that war is imminent, we're saying that the President of the United States cannot on his own make that kind of determination. So we're trying to act. We're trying to move beyond the cynicism. We're saying that if most American people believe that it's inevitable, then the question becomes, what is the process by which we enter into it, and do we as members of Congress have the right to stand up in that debate and effectively represent our constituents, some who may think we should and some who may think we should not?
Well, Congress voted against the declaration of war with
100,000 troops in the Saudi desert. Could you do that? Would that pass?
I would like to hope that it would, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't have a crystal ball. But I would think that with the American people beginning to rethink, when the president moved from defend and deter to a question of a credible offensive military option, you notice the polls started to change very quickly because American people started to see the prospect of going to war and many of their young people dying in the context of the Persian Gulf. And I think that politicians and members of Congress try to read polls and try to reflect their various constituents. And I think that there are millions of people in this country who have serious questions about us going to war. One thing that a declaration of war does give us is the president's rationale. It seems to me that the president should have to, through the Congress of the United States, make his case to the American people as to why he wants to put 400,000 or 500,000 troops in harm's way. A declaration of war gives us the opportunity to debate that political question, and we're saying that we ought to have that right. And let the chips fall where they may politically.
Why are you not citing the War Powers Resolution with troops in harm's way?
Other people may want to respond, but I think the War Powers Act is an extremely weak read. As a matter of fact, you may recall during the debate on the War Powers Act in the 1970s, I voted against the War Powers Act that was construed at that time as a great liberal victory, and I thought that it was a meaningless piece of legislation, and I